going.
Josh
so.
M. Blackman on Twitter if you need it.
Yeah, hashtag, right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We are here for a co-sponsored event. I'm here on behalf of the Federalist Society for Law and Public Policy Studies. A lot of you here are probably not familiar with us, so I'll give our little intro spiel just so that you have some idea. The Federalist Society was founded in 1982. It's a group of conservatives and libertarians dedicated to reforming the current legal order. We are committed to the principles that the state exists to preserve freedom, that the separation of governmental powers is central to our Constitution, and that it is emphatically the province and duty of the judiciary to say what the law is and not what it should be. The Society is an organization of 40,000 lawyers, law students, scholars, and other individuals who believe and trust that individual citizens can make the best choices for themselves and for society. Our main purpose is to sponsor events like this where we can bring together different viewpoints and have a great discussion on important constitutional principles and things like new technology. So we're thrilled to be hosted by the University of Advancing Technology, and I'll turn over to Dr. Bowman now for a little bit of word about the university and their hosting. Thank you.
And again, welcome everybody. For those of you who are new to campus, UAT is a small private college that is focused on computer science and all its disciplines. And for those of you who attend here, you know what we're about. The reason why we're excited about hosting for today is, from our student perspective, one of the things we care a great deal about is, as you are a technologist and recognizing that technology shapes the way we think about our lives and the social order and the rules of engagement, you know, how does that work? How does it play out? And today we've got a number of students from our ethics courses and our tech and society courses, who, as we get involved in the conversation about, as we think about new technologies where we can manufacture at home, how does that change the way we think about public safety? And as an example.
I feel like Charlton Heston.
Yeah.
From my cold 3D-Printed hands.
And so, thank you, Nathan. And as an example, this is a non-functioning rifle printed out of using
non-functioning, what?
That's out of the 3D printers on our campus. And so this is an interesting conversation. And so we're really excited to hear what Professor Blackman has to say. And then we've got the FBI speaking later. And so we hope we're informed. We hope we have some really good questions, some really good dialogue. And I think with that, Josh, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate it. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the Federal Society and UAT for hosting me today. This is definitely a slightly different audience than I'm used to. But I think you will learn a lot, and I will learn a lot from you. I don't often have a prop, but this is, in effect, what we're talking about. This is not a real gun, but were it real, it would be pretty powerful, huh? Yes. So I'm going to put this back down very gently. Anyway, so our topic for today involves 3D guns, but from a legal perspective, involving the First and Second Amendments. You may not have ever thought about these things because you're computer science majors, many of you, but these are important aspects of our constitutional order that directly implicate the government's ability to stop you from making big guns like that one. So let's talk first about 3D printing, right? I don't need to tell most of the people in this room how 3D printing works. You have a CAD file, we design on the screen what something looks like. It could be a house, it could be a car, or it could be something as simple as a sphere. Like in the real world, all objects have dimensions, length, width, and height. If you want to design a sphere, you say, okay, the sphere is a height of 20 and a radius of 5. And when you put in that code, boom, it generates a sphere with those dimensions. Okay? But if you think about it, you're not just coding. You're using your creativity, your ingenuous spark to create something that wasn't there before. And in our constitutional order, that's what we like to call the freedom of expression. You may not think about it, but when you guys code a game or design an app or something, that's an act of free speech. And the government can't censor it and tell you that you can't do this, right? So 3D printing, go upstairs to the Maker Lab upstairs. It's very cool. You create all sorts of objects in 3 dimensions. They have a printer that looks just like this upstairs. And the way it works is like a candle. Same way you take a thread You dip in some wax. You dip in the wax again. You dip in the wax a third time. Before you know it, you actually have a candle. 3D printing works in a very similar fashion. You lay down a very thin layer of plastic, let it cool. Then you layer down another thin layer of plastic, let it cool. And you layer one on top of another, till you have a complete object. So for those of you who can't stay for the demonstration later, I have a mini simulation of designing an object. Now, I'm assuming there are a lot of geeks in this room, so when you realize what's being created here, I want you to stop me and raise your hands. Okay? So this is a 3D printer creating an object in 3 dimensions, right? So you start off with a base layer, and you have this honeycomb fill, one layer on top of the other. And you keep adding more and more and more. If you know what it is, stop me, okay? Scream it out. More. You don't get it yet? More. Yoda. Oh, wow. This is legit. Usually people get it at this one or this one. But you got it at this one, sir. You win the prize. Okay? There is no prize, but you win it. Anyway, so yes, Yoda. So you can create a really interesting, intricate, three-dimensional shape of a beloved character from a movie that many of you probably have seen, and actually probably all, who am I kidding? All of you have seen, right? And Disney hasn't shut them down quite yet, but this is actually illegal. For example, Disney owns Yoda and his likeness. Okay, so you go to the top, and eventually Yoda's head is finished, or finished Yoda head is, and you have a complete design. And you can make some very intricate and elaborate things. This is an interlocking set of gears that can be manufactured purely with a 3D printer. So of course, because we're human, what's one of the first things that people try to design with a 3D printer? A gun. Hold it up, my friend. Perhaps nothing as ingenious as this, because this will not make it very far anywhere. But a gun was designed to be made out of 3D printed plastic. Now I should disclose, this is the Liberator design, was designed by a guy named Cody Wilson, who I am representing and doing some consulting for, so I do need to disclose that. But Cody designed a number of types of weapons using 3D printing. One of the first efforts was what's called an AR-15 lower. And for any of you the gun nuts in the room, which I count myself as one, the AR-15 lower is effectively the most important part of the gun. That's what you need the government's permission to buy, more or less. Wilson was able to make an AR-15 lower that he put with the upper receiver, and he made a semi-automatic gun. This was able to handle hundreds of rounds of ammunition. He was also able to make a magazine. This is the thing you put the bullets into, okay? Again, this was able to handle hundreds of rounds of ammunition, one after another. Mind you, these are all products Cody made by himself on his printer at home in Austin, Texas. But what really sent the feds into a tizzy was this, a handgun known as the Liberator, okay? Why is it called the Liberator? Well, he was liberating people from the strictures of gun control. But more importantly, this was a handgun made entirely out of parts manufactured with a 3D printer. The only thing that's metal is this little nail, which is effectively the firing pin, and this little 22 bullet. It's a little, little basically a buckshot pretty much. It's a small round. But those are the only pieces of metal on this gun. And this was fabricated entirely on a 3D printer. Print out the pieces, put them together, and what do you got? A working firearm, which he fired himself and was able to fire several rounds from. Okay? Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, oh my God, this is terrible. This is a big problem, right? The problem's going to be someone's going to print a gun on their Hewlett-Packard inkjet printer, right? It's just going to pop out. You know, it'll take 3 ink cartridges, right? It'll just pop out, right? So I'm urging you to not panic, and especially the people in this room, recognize that innovation often comes with possible danger. When people develop new technologies, they can be used to harm, but they can also be used for great new things. So let's talk about zip guns. Anyone know what a zip gun is? Okay, I'm in Arizona. I'm in friendly territory. I gave this talk in Los Angeles last week. It didn't go quite so well. But Sandy Hook, right. So listen, we can discuss that, but people know what a zip gun is here. Okay, a zip gun is making a gun from the hardware store. Go to the Home Depot, pick up any random parts, you can make a gun. This is a garden hose and a soldering iron, and you can make a pistol out of it. This is one of those little flashlights, you attach to a keychain, right? You can make that into a gun also. Or you can do what these idiots did and make one out of steel tubing. Okay, and I don't call them idiots lightly, but they're idiots because they're firing a gun indoors. So look what they did. They have a piece of steel tubing and a shotgun shell. At the end of the steel tubing, they have this little dimple, which they treat as a firing pin. Okay, so what they do, they loaded the shotgun shell into the barrel. This is where it gets really dumb. You can see all those holes right there because they've practiced this before. And what they're going to do is they're going to jam it in to ignite the charge in the cartridge, right? So ready? Boom. Okay. These are parts that you can buy at a hardware store for a few dollars. Okay? Not expensive. And you just made a weapon. Right? If you brought this piece of steel tubing in your suitcase, TSA wouldn't look twice at it. Okay? The shotgun shell they maybe object to, as they would object to many bullets. But the steel tubing itself, no one's going to object to that if they put that in your bag. The reason why I show these clips is because I want to stress one very important aspect that people may not appreciate. Under ATF, our favorite convenience store, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, under their regulations, right? Under their regulations, making a gun for yourself, making a pistol for yourself, is perfectly lawful. Perfectly lawful. Unless, if you sell it, different ball game, right? But if you're making a zip gun for yourself out of scrap metal and a garden hose, the feds have no problem with what you're doing. The reason why is that for as long as there's been in American history, people making their own guns. Go back to the time of the founding, and the Patriots made their own muskets, and they poured their own molten balls. This was an important aspect of American history. Right? Come in, have a seat, guys. But, alas, liberty is always precarious when the government has an interest. And I want to talk today about two aspects of constitutional law which some of you may or may not have ever studied, and how those aspects of constitutional law implicate 3D printed guns. Okay? So the first thing is the First Amendment. It comes first, of course. The First Amendment guarantees us the right of free speech and free expression, even when that speech is dangerous. So how many of you have ever heard of the Anarchist Cookbook? Of course, in this room, everyone raises their hand, of course. So the Anarchist Cookbook is this book that was around in the 60s and 70s that basically gives you instructions of how to blow stuff up, right? How to build a pipe bomb, how to build a grenade, how to do an IED, okay? Within the pages of this book are instructions to a lot of really bad things. Unsurprisingly, the government tried to censor it. They tried to cease publication. They tried to prevent people from selling this book. And the courts consistently held, no. The mere fact that speech, a book, can be used for dangerous purposes is not a sufficient reason to censor it. Generally, we protect speech because it's dangerous, right? Because we're teaching something the government may not want us to learn. That's why we have free speech. We do not want the state in a position to decide what is good and what is bad speech. We do not want some bureaucrat sitting in an office somewhere telling us that this book is bad for us and we can't have it. I'll decide if I want this book. And if I use it to blow something up, I'll go to jail. But it's my own knowledge and my own ability to share it. Okay? Why is this relevant for 3D printed guns? Well, one very important reason. Data, information, is speech. The mere fact that you design an expression with zeros and ones rather than ink on a piece of paper does not deprive it of any constitutional protection. In 2011, the Supreme Court held very clearly that creation and dissemination of information is speech. And because it's speech, the government cannot ban it. Regulate it? Maybe, but cannot censor it. And the courts held in many contexts. Video games. Okay, there was a case in 2010 called Brown versus EMA, where the state of California tried to prevent the sale of violent video games to children. The Supreme Court held they can't do that. The mere fact that these video games are violent is no big deal. Look at things like the Brothers Grimm and other fairy tales that are pretty morbid, right? Just because speech is dangerous does not give the government the license to ban it. This is a quintessential, fundamental aspect of our laws, which people forget about once you talk about the other amendment, which is dear to my heart, which is the Second Amendment, right? Once we're talking about guns, oh no, speech, we can't have that, yeah. KKK marching, skinheads, whatever, awesome. Oh, but no guns, that's too bad, right? So, the Second Amendment, it's been in the Constitution for over 200 years, says very clearly a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Unfortunately, until this man filed a lawsuit, Dick Heller, the Second Amendment didn't really mean too much. Followed by Heller was a guy named Otis McDonald. He filed a lawsuit also. Between the two of these guys, Heller and McDonald, the Supreme Court held that the Second Amendment guarantees an individual right to keep and bear arms everywhere in the United States. That you have the right to keep and bear arms a really big, scary gun, and the government has to have a good reason to tell you why you can't. Right? In the District of Columbia or Chicago, where these gentlemen live, they tried banning even the possession of a pistol in home for self-defense. The Supreme Court said, no, you cannot ban that. But there's a question, right? A preliminary question. Where do you get a gun from? Right? We have the right to keep and bear arms. Where do you get this gun from? And this is what I call the right to acquire arms. You'll see where I'm going in a minute, right? It's not enough to say you have the right to bear arms. You got to get it from somewhere. Guns don't just magically appear in your holster when someone's robbing you, right? You have to actually go to the store, buy it, and acquire it. Dick Heller had a gun, but DC told him, you can't use it. And the second you take the locks off this gun, you are now a felon, even in his own home. After the court decision, Heller got his permit and now was able to acquire a gun. Okay? Why is this relevant? Because the way 3D printing works is I put information online. I put a blueprint on the internet and someone then downloads it. You're sharing information about a gun. And it's the sharing and then downloading is just acquiring. You're actually acquiring information about how to make a gun. Okay? Second, you have the right to make arms. This is zip guns, right? Since the beginning of our republic, we've had a proud history of patriots making muskets. If you ever see the John Adams miniseries, there's a great scene where Abigail Adams is pouring molten balls of lead, right, to help the war effort, the Revolutionary War effort. If you don't want to buy a gun, you make it yourself. So I see the Second Amendment as encompassing both the right to buy and make your own arms, which is very important because the way 3D printing works is you download a blueprint, you tweak it a little bit, and then you print it out yourself. Right? That is the quintessential act of bearing arms for the gun you like. And this isn't just some sort of fancy thing to make a really big gun. Say someone has a disability and they can't pull a trigger because of whatever disability they have. They can actually custom design a gun, imagine that, to suit their needs. There are actually legitimate disability reasons why you want people to make guns suited to their particular needs. But wait, there's more, as they like to say, right? This isn't just about the First Amendment or the Second Amendment standing by themselves. There's a hybrid. Because what are you speaking about? You're speaking about another constitutional right. And when you're speaking about exercising a constitutional right, it takes on an even higher level of significance. That this right's even more profound. Okay? So my remaining time, I'd like to go over the history of several efforts to ban 3D printed guns. So the first law I want to talk about is the Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988. This law says any gun must have a certain quantity of metal in it. It's about 3 ounces, give or take. And that amount of metal is designed to make sure an airport security, the metal detectors, is triggered. Okay? This law was passed in 1988 following the big promotion of the Glock handgun. Everyone know what a Glock is? Right? Anyone carrying one at the moment? I won't ask. But this is all Bruce Willis's fault. So you see, in the Die Hard movie, John McClane has this one line, and I will not say with his swag, but I'll do my best. That punk pulled a Glock 7 on me. There is no Glock 7. No such gun exists. You know what that is? It's a porcelain gun made in Germany. Actually, it's an Austrian gun made of plastic composites. So none of this is correct. But the part he said that freaked people out is that it won't show up on the airport X-ray machines, okay? Not true. The Glock has metal in it. It will show up on the X-ray machines and will show up on the body scanners. But in any event, Congress freaked out, as they often do, says, oh my God, we need to pass something. So they passed this law saying all guns must have a certain quantity of metal, okay? Fine. Why is this not a big deal? Because bullets, okay? Bullets are made out of metal, steel, lead, whatever you want. A gun without a bullet is not very effective. I guess that would be very effective. You can bludgeon someone to death with it. But a handgun without bullets won't get you very far. So even if you make a gun entirely out of plastic, putting bullets in your bag will trigger a metal detector. Like, I can't walk through TSA without my keys, my little keys triggering it, okay? But the point more so is that this law works effectively to assuage concerns about metal detectors. But more recently, with the advent of Cody Wilson and these 3D guns, Congress has said we got to do something more. So New York Senator Chuck Schumer, who is never one to let a microphone go away, found that we can do something about this. We got to do something. We can't do nothing. And he proposed extension of all these various laws, but Congress didn't do anything. So I want to run you through a couple proposals, right, of how people say we can deal with these 3D printed guns. So one way is saying, oh, I got an idea. Let's ban the materials, right? 3D printers are too dangerous. We can't have people printing out these guns. Well, that would require banning all various forms of plastics that are used in 3D printers. That would shut down your lab, okay? Also, it won't work because people have already designed metal guns at 3D printers, right? This is a 1911, very common handgun, manufactured entirely with a 3D printer. I held it in my hand. It feels solid. Now, this defeats the purpose of having an undetectable firearm. My point is you can't get rid of the materials. Some people said, oh, I got an idea. Let's ban gunpowder, right? Let's, Texas, Arizona, you were laughing, right? LA, they said, yeah, that's a good idea. We could ban gunpowder, right? I love giving this talk in different parts of the country. It's fun. I see where people laugh and cry differently. So some people say, let's ban gunpowder, right? Well, again, the problem there is Second Amendment. People have a right to make firearms, to load their own ammunition, and there's more gunpowder in the United States than probably any, probably like, I don't know, Starbucks coffee, right? There's a lot of gunpowder in the United States. This will not go very far. But one interesting aspect is using intellectual property laws, okay? So there's something called DRM, Digital Rights Management, which I'm sure people in this room know nothing about, not that you've ever downloaded any legal files, right, friends? So you may remember the olden days if you had an iPod and you tried to download a song from, Amazon. You couldn't play it on your iPod because of this digital rights management, that it was limited, okay? So same way with Kindle, right? I can't read a Nook book on my Kindle device. It's all, siloed. But what manufacturing, right? What if instead of downloading the latest movie on a torrent, I download the blueprints of how to design, a pair of Nike shoes, or a new Roomba vacuum cleaner, or whatever, right? Why can't I just print this myself? See, manufacturers are freaking out, right? Because they realize once 3D printing takes off, you guys don't need to go to the stores anymore. You can hack and download the blueprint for a pair of Nike shoes, or a football, or a cell phone, or whatever I'm holding in my hand, right? You can print it yourself. Why would anyone need to go to a store? Okay? And the manufacturers are freaking out about this because it poses a severe and significant threat to their intellectual property. So here's what's going to happen, right? We have a common economic concept known as the Baptists and the bootleggers. So follow. During Prohibition, who were the people that wanted to ban alcohol? We had the Baptists because they had religious objections, and then you had the bootleggers because they could profit from the cheap moonshine, right? They realized that if we ban this, we can make a lot more money. So effectively what ends up happening is that you have these groups that band together. And I see guns as the Baptist and bootlegger compromise. You have all these groups who want to get rid of guns, unite with the manufacturer saying, you know what? We need to put a filter in your 3D printer. We want to tell him that you cannot print a gun with your 3D printer. I should say for my cold dead hands, right? You put a filter in, so if he wanted to go print that, they'll say, sorry, This looks like a firearm. You can't print this. This should scare you significantly. If the government's able to install filters into your devices, telling you what you can and cannot print, we've lost, right? We're done. Because at that point, our ability to create and innovate has been directly limited, okay? And by the way, if you build something that looks slightly different than a gun, it'll print, or if you hack the DRM, it'll print. So this will only affect people who don't want to bother hacking their devices, okay? One final method that's relevant is export controls. So under something called the ITAR, which is International Traffic in Arms Regulatories Act, right? The government says, we don't want you exporting unlawful munitions to foreign countries. Okay, what's a munition? Well, you may think, munition's like a bomb or an explosive or something really bad, right? Well, actually, no. The government's taken the position that source code, the stuff that all of you program, is a munition. If you program a cryptographic algorithm, that is a munition. And you need the government's permission to export that. And by export, I mean put it on the internet. That you need some wonk in DC to sign off before you put on your blog source code. That doesn't scare you. You should be very scared. There was actually a case where DOJ said, okay, you know what? You have this book on cryptography. If you want to ship the book, fine. But you can't include a CD-ROM in the book with a source code. You can print the source code out on paper. That's fine, but you can't put an electronic file. Does that make any sense? Thousands of lines of source code. You can print it in a book. But no CD-ROM, okay? This is effectively the government's position on this matter. And what's interesting is even though the State Department has taken this position, DOJ has effectively said this is probably unconstitutional, but State Department's doing it anyway because national security, whatever, right? And here's where the rubber meets the road. Cody Wilson, who I mentioned that I am representing on some stuff, got this letter from the State Department. He had put online source codes. He hadn't shipped through FedEx a gun to anyone. He hasn't sent anyone any bombs. He put zeros and ones on his website, source code. He got a takedown letter from the government saying, you cannot put this source code online. Take it down now and submit to this process. We won't actually tell you what this process is, right? Do something. And we'll wait. 2 years later, it still hasn't been approved. Okay? There's significant, look at this, data must be removed immediately. Yeah, it's all take down files from your blog. This is very dangerous stuff, my friends. And I argue that it's unconstitutional, both in terms of the First and Second Amendments. So I will stop here because we have a full panel jam-packed. I think now you have enough information to get the gist of where we're going. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me get rid of the microphone. So we want to open up to questions, but as a part of that, we wanted to bring up Special Agents Helmer and Schaff, wherever they found seats. Right, there we go. And did you guys want to intro with some comments or some thoughts or FBI perspectives on it? Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. Good evening. Martin Helmer. I'm a supervisory special agent with the FBI here in Phoenix. I supervise our cyber squad. This is Special Agent Paul Schaff. He's an agent on the cyber squad. So, funny enough, Paul and I actually didn't start. This isn't a topic that we talk about much in the Bureau. In fact, Paul and I started researching this issue this morning. Really, it's not something, but it's emerging. It's an important topic to discuss, I think.
Right. But we're, just so you know, we're not in the government sitting there going, how are we going to stop these 3D printers? That wasn't even a topic on the thing.
So what struck me as I sat here and listened to the presentation was not necessarily the constitutionality issues, because in the field of law enforcement, our mission is law enforcement and the protection of our Constitution according to those laws. But it was one of public safety and the safety of law enforcement officers as we encounter these sorts of weapons just on the streets of America. If a law enforcement officer if someone points what looks like a white plastic gun at a cop, is he going to think twice? Is he going to think, oh, that's not a real gun? And therefore risk his own life or safety as a result. Not only that, but the ease with which these things can be made causes me a lot of concern. Paul brought up a good point as we were talking earlier. The kinds of people who are probably making these guns with 3D printers are those who can't purchase them legitimately.
At least at the cost of the 3D printers today.
So should we worry that that these guns are now going to be used to perpetrate crimes, by these types of folks? Paul, did you want to add anything?
Well, right, because like I said, I mean, you kind of did the introduction. Somebody buys a $5,000 printer to make a gun, and I'm like, they're an idiot. Guns are a lot cheaper than that, right? So who are you doing it? So is it a prohibited? So within the federal government, do you think it's a good idea for somebody who commits murder to have a gun? Anybody? I mean, somebody who's committed a crime with a gun, maybe a bank robbery or something. We have what we call prohibited possessors, right? So a prohibited possessor is going to show up on the list. No, you can't purchase a gun. You can't have a gun, right? They know that. That's the law. So if a guy's going, well, how are we going to rob a bank? I can't get to a gun, right? Well, I can buy one off the street. I can print one, right? So the guns on the street are probably going to be a lot cheaper. So those are options, right? I'm not saying technology fosters that, right? I mean, a gun, like you said the amount of metal in it. You can't have a gun. Does anybody remember, this is probably an older movie, Line of Fire, right? You had the plastic gun, and that was the premise of the movie. The guy could get the gun in and stuff like that. Well, with 3D weapons, that fictional thing, and there was a plastic gun back in the day, is becoming more reality. Well, who wants a gun that's undetectable, right? Kind of thing. That's the thing and within law enforcement, we look at those zip guns and stuff like that. I see the flashlight and stuff like that. They give us bulletins, right? So when a guy comes out of a car and he takes his flashlight and he turns over the bottom, right, and he's going to do something with it, is it a flashlight or is it a gun, right? Because on the zip guns in the world we see little weapons made out of those things, just like we see keychain handcuff keys. Right? So we see little things. Now, is it illegal to have a handcuff key? No. But you have an officer in the back of a car, and he can get it out of his lanyard, right? Or his, what do they call the survival bands? Have you guys seen the survival band that has the handcuff key in it? There's some that has in the middle where it braces together, has a handcuff key in it. Well, if that guy has, it's just jewelry, we'll let him have it. Well, if there's a dangerous guy in the back of your car, and you get that handcuff key, that's created a lot of problems for that law enforcement officer, right? So especially some of the local rural areas, they don't have the cages. We see the LAPD, right? They have a cage, you can't get to the officer or anything like that. Some of the rural areas, I mean, they practically have the guy sit in the front seat. I'm serious, it's kind of thing. I don't mean to steal anything from that, but and we can print those all day long. We're not after the people that are printing 3D guns or anything like that, and it's just a technology. I was going to comment, the machinists now are kind of laughing. The machinists back in the 50s and 60s, they had equipment, and that's what some of the theories were back in the day, is that, oh no, we're training this group of people that are machinists, they could create their own guns and rise up, right? We laugh at that now, but again, a trained machinist, just like a trained mechanic, you put him in a junkyard, the guy's he's in a grocery store, right? He can make whatever he wants. So, this 3D printing, we see it as, we have more and more things to look at for somebody. When we frisk somebody down and stuff like that and say, do they have any weapons, right? That area has broadened a lot more, right? What's this? Oh, it's a toy gun. Is it a toy gun or is it a functioning weapon? We're going to take it just in case, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think that's the crux of what we're here to discuss is, there's the constitutional issues, and then how do you balance that against these public safety and law enforcement issues?
John, no, just to kind of kick off, maybe I think we're turning to a lot of questions. Procedurally, have you shifted protocol because of the sort of thing, plastic, devices, weapons, and things like that, or is there a process involved in the attack protocol?
I'd say no. The protocols that were previously in place, at least, we're talking about a number of different things. So, tactically, when you're approaching someone on the street, right? You're usually looking at their hands is what we're trained. Look at their hands, anything in their hands, and obeying commands. And if they're not doing so, if they're not showing your hands, well then that raises you up a level, right? Now we're trained, the FBI's deadly force policy is that we're permitted to use deadly force if we feel that our lives or the lives of others are in imminent danger. So, this is a split-second decision. If someone raises what looks like a white toy gun at us, do you utilize that deadly force? Is that in fact, an imminent threat to my life or someone else's, or not? As far as once you actually do get hands on someone, and you're patting them down for contraband and that kind of thing, anything that might be dangerous, well, no. Our protocols haven't changed necessarily. We're just now more aware to be looking for, weapons that might not look like traditional weapons.
Well, with that, thanks. Let's open for questions.
This is a law nerd question, so I apologize to the technophiles in the audience. But Josh, I wanted to ask you about where you think this is headed in terms of scrutiny on a First Amendment question. Do you think that this is going to be treated more like commercial speech or political speech, or?
Well, I appreciate it, and I thank both the gents from the FBI for doing their jobs and keeping us on the right side of safety. I agree with everything that you said. When you're on the street and you see a little plastic thing, you need to probably presume that very well may be a gun. And I have no objection to the law enforcement aspect of this. Jen's question asks about not if you stop a guy in the street who's putting his hands in his pocket and has this little white plastic thing. The question is, what can the government do before that, right? What steps can the federal government take to keep those guns out of people's hands? And the way I see it is there are two possible routes. Stopping the sharing of information, the blueprints, and stopping the printing, right? Because once the gun's printed, you would police that the same way you have any other unserial gun. You'd have to investigate it, find where it is, right? But can the government stop you from getting the information in the first place? And can the government stop you from printing it, right? These are the two choke points, if you will, for this gun. The first point, requiring you to stop information sharing, that would have severe strict scrutiny in constitutional lingo, because you're telling someone, you can't put this information online. You can't share this information. You can't publish an anarchist cookbook, right? That, I think the Supreme Court would say, no mas. The second question, though, I think is a little bit closer call. Could the government put a filter list on a 3D printer and say, here are 100 different designs that we don't want you to print. If you print something like this, you press print, it says, bam, 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 no, right? That would be a more direct way of keeping the guns out of hands of people who probably shouldn't have them. And I welcome the gents from law enforcement to weigh in, but I think even there'd be some constitutional issues because you're telling someone you can't create. Like this guy's creating a fake gun that looks like a real gun. We really want to tell him you can't do that. I don't know what your thoughts are on this.
Paul, you want to jump in?
Sure. I would say on the filter and stuff, I mean, we have a few contraband things, so this argument kind of goes back, and I don't want to shock anybody, but this kind of goes back to child pornography, okay? So printers print, if you can believe it, child pornography, right? That is contraband. That is something you can't distribute on the internet. That is something that if you print it, it's seizable at that point. Distributing it, kid you not, we have, if I make a CD from a subject's case and give it to his defense attorney to review it, I could go to jail because I've distributed child pornography. I'm not kidding you, right? That is contraband, right? The defense attorneys get pretty upset when I go, no, you gotta come in your office and look at it. Ooh, what do I gotta get in your office? Because I'm not gonna give you a CD of this stuff because it's illegal. So, do we take it on intellectual property? One of the things you were saying is about, you can't distribute stuff, based on national security and stuff. We do have a national security side kind of thing. If you can believe that goes through a process and stuff like that, what is national security? Okay, on F-16 back in 1980, couldn't be, certain parts of it couldn't be distributed out. That's easing up as that technology goes out. So you don't want the plans of an F-22 going out, right, to our enemies, right? I don't know. I mean, you don't want ISIS flying over an F-22. I don't, right? So if anybody's heard of someone printing this F-22, please call us. Okay, but what I'm saying is, there are certain restrictions on that. So we have the contraband. Are we gonna put a chip in? Do we know of values of, what we call the hash, you guys all know what hash values are, right? Do we put hash values out there on computers, like if you have this, notify the government? No. Do we search for those? Yes. Do we go into the different realms? And within printing, just printing in general, that changed that world, okay? So back in the 50s and 60s, you had to have print. Well, to print it, you had to have a printer. So you had a lot of bootleg printers out there. So we were finding the bootleg printers to stop that distribution of it, get their magazine lists and stuff like that. Now, with the advent of documents and sharing that stuff, it's become a lot broader, a lot more broadening it. We're still chasing them, but there isn't a bootleg printer that we can go to. It's just evolved. I think with 3D printers, you'll probably have the same thing. The printing isn't illegal. It's usually, it goes back to the intentions of the person doing it.
Okay, we have some questions? All right, sir, right here in the front.
You mentioned that there are certain parts of F-22, for instance, that are illegal to produce. Is that what you're saying?
It's illegal to leave the country within our trusted partners.
Okay.
So that you're-
and so, Josh, I'm assuming that you believe that's a violation of First Amendment rights?
No, so I mean, here's the issue, right? If you're actually exporting a physical part, right, a physical airplane, I'm with you, okay? There's a much closer relation between exporting a physical F-22 missile guidance system versus exporting information about it, right?
About the information.
But the blueprints of it, I think, becomes a slightly different situation. I think the government actually needs to make their burden. So let me explain this like this. Usually in the law, you can stop speech in one of two ways: prior restraint or post restraint, right? Prior restraint means we tell you you can't share this information. Post restraint means come in after you've shared it, we get a court order to tell you to stop. Okay? With the latter, with a court order, you actually have a judge saying, okay, under the First Amendment, you can stop this. Under the first one, there's no judge. There are, no respect to DOJ, a bunch of government lawyers saying so. And I am much more comfortable with the regime where a judge is involved in the process of shutting this down. Now, if a company wants, as a matter of course, if you're Boeing or Lockheed Martin, you probably want to ask the government first, should we send this F-22 abroad, right? That's probably a good idea. And Boeing's probably not going to share this information. But if we're talking about a 1911 handgun, which is open source, which is available everywhere, to need the government's permission before you post it, that's where I think you run into trouble. Yes, sir?
What can the government regulate transferring blueprints similar to the way it regulates sales and transfers of arms right now? You just say you can't just post it. You can create the blueprints and you can sell them, and you have to follow certain protocols.
Well, that's what exists now. You basically need to get the government's permission in advance to share information, right? And I think that's where the constitutional problem arises, because a lot of the speech actually does have expressive value, and the government can't restrain you in advance unless they make a showing, and a judge may or may not approve of that.
So if I had a 3D printer with blueprints, there is a mechanism to go to the ATF and get approval to.
It's actually the State Department, and it's not so clear because it's state and it's also commerce. But the process, and again, I'm doing some work for Cody Wilson, but he submitted his request over 2 years ago and he's still waiting. That's right. This isn't like, you get something right away. They can just string you along forever.
Have they given permission to anyone?
No. Not to my knowledge, at least. Yes, sir.
I just read within the last week or two, Mr. Wilson is having a deep problem with regard to FedEx and other shippers. Would you care to say anything about that?
Well, effectively, and this may surprise you, but you are allowed to ship guns through FedEx. You're allowed to ship guns through UPS. The way our system works is you can't mail a gun directly to a person, but you ship it to a FFL, a Federal Firearms Licensee, and then they give you the gun. That's how it works. Cody recently found that FedEx will no longer do business with him, and we don't know the reason why. But FedEx does ship guns all the time. Yes, ma'am, over there. Right there.
Thank you. Thank you. My question is partially twofold. In the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned a permit and the man holding up the permit. Okay. Before we go to that, let me ask you about the Cato Institute.
Constitution from Cato.
You are a member of Cato.
Well, I'm actually not a member of, I mean, I support them, and I've worked with them.
I figured you probably did.
I don't speak on behalf of Cato, although many of them are dear friends of mine. I think Cato has filed a number of briefs in case of supporting this, but I don't think Cato's weighed on this issue.
Thank you. That's important because Cato is looking out for the individual's protection and right of speech based on constitutionality. But let me ask you about that permit. What is so wrong with people who are making guns with a 3D or whatever modality actually getting a permit? It seems to be logical, it seems to be legal, and it doesn't offend anyone to get that permit to have a gun.
Well, you do need a permit to make a gun for purposes of selling it, right? If you want to manufacture and sell guns, you do need, there's a rigorous permitting process. But as it stands now, to make your own gun, zip guns, you need no permit.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I have no problem with that. None. And in fact, in the case of District of Columbia versus Heller, when Dick Heller had a permit to possess a gun, that's an anomaly. In most states in the Union, you don't even need a permit to possess a gun. The DC requires you to jump through all these hoops, get fingerprinted, ballistic testing, all these other. There's a great book called Emily Got Her Gun, describing how many steps it takes to actually get a gun in DC. It's quite onerous. So it's questionable whether all those steps are necessary. People, my DOJ friends may think, yes, we need all those steps. Alan?
To the FBI gentleman, possession of a gun is legal. In fact, it's honorable, constitutionally protected property. What's the problem with printing guns and owning them without any restriction? You haven't done anything wrong. Seems to me the only problem is if the gun is printed by a prohibited possessor. So if somebody makes one, has the blueprints, has lots of printers, as long as they're not a prohibited possessor, there's no harm, no foul, no crime, nobody harmed. What's the problem? If you're on the street and anybody holds up a wallet or anything in their hands and doesn't obey commands, you have to presume there's a risk and you should take appropriate action. But if somebody prints a gun, there's absolutely nothing wrong. If Jennifer here would have printed a gun, sorry, Jen, what has she done wrong? There should be no restriction on it whatsoever. It's like she printed a book, both constitutionally protected property. So what's the issue?
There is no issue as long as it's for your own use. The thing, basically, ATF says you can make guns of your own,
And
your own personal use.
you can sell your own privately owned gun in this state to somebody else. You could sell it to Michael here. Wouldn't be any problem.
But you have to, if you're gonna make a gun and sell it, you have to have a permit.
Not
Basically,
in
you
this
have,
state.
yeah, you have to be a licensed gun seller.
To sell your own privately owned gun?
If you made it, if you make it, right, you can't, if you make a gun, it's gotta be for your own personal use. It's almost like drugs, you know, personal use, they scream that personal use, right? Right? Now, if you have a semi-truck and you're like, personal use, no, it's not gonna fall into that, right? Same thing with with a gun. You make a 3D printed gun and you sell it, that's the violation.
All right, I'll grant the point on if you make it, but you can take a gun you privately own that you bought and sell it to somebody without any restriction whatsoever.
You can, yes.
So you can make a lot of 3D printed guns and own them and keep them. There should be no regulation, there's no problem here.
As in selling them?
Aside from selling them, but
Okay.
owning them, owning the blueprints,
Okay.
circulating the blueprints.
And there's none.
no
I mean,
issue.
I know a machinist that has tons of guns that he's made, that he does not intend to resell.
Okay, ma'am, right there?
If the sticking point is selling it, what if, for instance, you were gifting it to a friend?
Doesn't make a difference, does it?
I'm not sure on the
Yeah, I don't
gifting,
know.
I'll look at it, but basically it says, if you make a gun for your personal use, that's what's allowed, right? So when you start getting into that, you're starting splitting hairs, right? I gifted it to my friend so he could get out of prison. I don't know.
Okay. There's a question in the back row?
Just a quick question of clarification of logic. In your presentation, you brought up the ATF regulation on you are allowed to make your own gun, but you also bring up it being constitutionally allowed to create your own gun. Are you connecting to that First Amendment, or are you connecting to the ATF regulation?
Oh, my friend, the Constitution predates the ATF by 200 years. So the constitutional right to make a gun far exceeds anything the ATF could ever concoct in their wildest imaginations. The right to make a gun stands totally apart from whatever BAFT says is the rule of the day.
Okay, I just was wondering where exactly you were getting that from.
The way I get it from is like this. If you have the right to bear arms, you have to get the gun from somewhere. And you can get it in one of two ways. Acquire it or make it. I think both aspects are implicit in actually having a meaningful Second Amendment right. Yes, sir.
One thing I've been wondering is, like, in this era, the name is now FedEx Office, but people may remember Kinko's or Alpha Graphics. You go for a print job. You'd like to get something printed. I'm imagining in the future there's going to be 3D printer services, and you can go and get something printed. So
Staples.
that may open
That's easy.
something up.
Staples already does that. Go to any Staples, have a maker bot, and you can print something there. It's very cheap, very affordable. I don't think they'll print you that, but they'll give you Yoda at least.
Why not? Could they?
FedEx won't ship it. They won't. Not so easy. Yes.
Mine's directed to the FBI. Are you here stating the opinions of the Bureau, or are you stating your personal?
These are the opinions of the FBI.
Yeah, in the back. All in the back.
Mine's kind of a two-part question. I have a question kind of for you guys all. I agree with the gentleman over there. I really don't believe that if you want to make a gun at home, make a gun at home. What I really am afraid of is that, somebody from ISIS or somebody else who enters our country with the full intent of doing harm. Wouldn't it make more sense if there's more accountability of what's being printed at home? Like an online database of your recent prints of some sort?
Oh man, how do we do that?
I really feel that
How do we do that? Do we keep a government log of everything you printed?
well, in our world, a lot of our programs, a lot of things that we do always have to have what we call an always-on account. It always has to be connected to the internet. Why couldn't they do the same thing for the 3D printing?
Fourth Amendment. Yeah, I mean the government, as much as the FBA, may like, they can't search things randomly. They have to have probable cause, and they can't simply say because you own a 3D printer, we suspect you're engaged in criminal activity. That would be really maybe the First, Second, Third, and Fourth Amendment. That's my new paper, right? Throw the Fourth Amendment in there. Yeah.
No, you're right. You're exactly right.
Well, no quartering of troops. You can print your own like little troops inside. Yes, sir, right there.
I mean, they tried that with video games, and people were immediately protesting that, so I can only imagine what would happen if they did that with 3D printing or just rebuilding a milling machine.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I bring up the example of a printer having a governed filter in it is that it may limit creativity beyond. Like, so say you mentioned hash values, right? Say the hash value for that gun resembles the hash value for a javelin, I don't know, right? Something that looks similar to it. You're now limiting creativity by requiring you to apply some sort of government form and triplicate that's notarized to ask for permission to print a javelin. I think that's where you run into some problems. Yes?
Hey, Josh. I'm wondering if you can sort of put this in the larger context, because when it comes to the First Amendment and new technology, this is sort of a recurring story, and maybe people don't appreciate it because we take these things for granted. But when radio first came out, people thought that this was not protected by the First Amendment, and it was going to be the downfall of Western society and television.
The orchestras hated
and
it, right?
movies, yeah. So, I mean, part of the reason we're having this discussion today is because it is the new technology, even though it is simply, in my mind, sort of an extension of what machinists have been able, any competent machinist has been able to do with a block of aluminum for years.
Yeah, so I mean, here's the rub, right? The provost will contest 3D printing is very cool, but you're not doing anything different that couldn't be done before, with some exceptions, right? That gun which he made is a beautiful gun you could make in a machine shop. It might take you longer, you might need more skill, but you can make the same thing. Now 3D printing, you can make like organs and really cool stuff, right? You can 3D print like, cells. That you can't do, but making stuff on a 3D printer, if I was skilled with a chisel, I can make that Yoda. It would probably take me years to figure out how to do it, but now I can learn it easily. I think why this is different is that a bunch of idiots in their basement who don't know machining and don't have sophisticated equipment can now make this with, click, click, click. And I think that's why it scares people, because you have a very different conception of what's being done to actually generate these ideas. But yeah, every time a new technology comes out, people get scared, and eventually it blows over and you move on. Yes, sir.
I have a question actually for both the gentleman from the FBI and Mr. Blackman. What difference do you think banning the distribution of those prints actually practically made? My understanding is they're available on quite a number of other websites around the world because they really needed that.
Well, we did DOJ, that was the State Department.
Yeah, it was State
And so you're getting into, and the other thing too is intellectual property, right? I don't know, your client, I don't know if he's patented his design.
Open source.
Open source. So some people want intellectual property. I mean, I can see where somebody prints out a gun, right? And they say that's our intellectual property. For example, if Smith & Wesson, the 1911, right? I don't know if they're going to make a case where you can't print those because it's our design kind of thing. They might have an argument if they did code it, right? I'm all for coding going out there, but you also have to realize that coding is free speech, but what it does to somebody else's computer is not. So I'm on the cyber computer intrusion thing, and it is illegal to send malicious code, right? So if I send you a code and it crashes your system, that is illegal. Some people are like, well, let's get Microsoft. No. You know, I'm serious. You know, like Microsoft has sent some stuff down to my computer. I'm like, no. But anyway, malicious code, like I said, there is laws for that. Have you sent malicious code? Are you controlling a botnet? Things like that. So we're developing the laws for that. So malicious code, if someone prints a design, open source, of a gun, right, and they say this is a fantastic gun, and before they do it, it actually either has a defect or they design it so it fires the opposite way, I would hope they would see the bullet, right? But kind of thing, we're going to want that public outcry is going to be stop that, right? Do not print this gun. We've seen that with drugs, illegal drugs and stuff like that. The illegal drugs, people are killing people, stuff like that. So I don't know if we'll see that with intellectual property where someone tweaks a design to the point where it malfunctions, right? So who's got the original source code? So like I said, when you start getting into the source code, you start getting into these realms of what does the original image look like and is it verifiable with that data that it's going to work the way it says it's going to work. That's how I look at software.
The short answer to your question is you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Once you put a file on the internet, it's gone. Boom. Yeah, ask Rihanna or Kim Kardashian. It's gone. You can't get that stuff back, okay? So it's somewhat, in the State Department, not the DOJ, but they told Cody to take it down. It was online for maybe a couple days at that point. Any torrent in the world, you will find the code on. It'll take you 2 minutes to find it. And that, I think, is why the government is so concerned about this, because once you put a file on the internet, child pornography, whatever, you can't get it back. It's replicated in umpteen places around the world, and you don't know who downloads it and shares on this network and that network. So it's very hard to choke it off at the source, because once you hit upload, send, I mean, these guys do cybercrime for a living. It's almost impossible to eliminate traces. Other questions? Let's try some note. Yes, sir.
Doesn't this just boil down to the Napster file sharing issue, which copyrighted material and Napster was shut down?
Well, Napster was shut down for intellectual property reasons, right? Because the RIA and Lars Ulrich and Metallica freaked out and said, you can't do this, you're killing our livelihood. Okay. Well, here, the gun that Cody put online was open source, right? There was no patent violated, no copyright infringed. So they don't have the same industry people. But I think what will end up happening is a lot of the manufacturers say, oh, we got to stop this technology, let's get rid of these scary guns, and oh, by the way, put in a filter saying you can't print Nike sneakers. Right, I think that's where you get the Baptist and bootlegger phenomenon. Other questions? Sir, over there?
In the religious liberties context, courts have been reluctant to find expression in baking cakes, taking photography, and other instances. It seems like a big shift to think of source code as expression. I think the end product certainly is something tangible for a court to sink its teeth into. How likely do you think it is that a court will find ones and zeros as expression?
Well, a number of courts have. So there are a number of decisions about cryptography finding that you have a First Amendment right to have cryptography. You mentioned the cake cases. I think those cases are wrong under the First Amendment, and I don't suspect the Supreme Court will agree with the New Mexico Supreme Court or the Oregon Supreme Court or whatever administrative judge that exists in some far-flung district in Oregon or whatever, right? For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, there have been a number of cases where bakers have said that I will not make a wedding cake for a gay couple. I'll make them a birthday cake or a Christmas cake, but not a wedding cake. And there is a expressive conduct in making a cake. It's an act of art. You're an artist. And I think those cases are very suspect in the First Amendment. The Supreme Court denied certiorari in a case called Lane Photography last year, which was actually surprising to me, but if on the merits, I see this hard going the other way. Alan?
There's a clarification I'd like to get here. Child pornography is an interesting sidelight here, because that's contraband on its face. The Undetectable Firearms Act makes a plastic gun contraband as well. So if you use a 3D printer to create a plastic gun, you've created contraband. Would you agree with that?
If it's lacking the metal piece, is that what you're saying?
Even the metal piece, you need 3.7 ounces of metal, or, enough to, the security exemplar is the standard.
If the
So you
gun's
gotta-
lacking that metal, then it violates the statute.
It needs more metal than the nail.
Yeah, well, the nail, actually, I think between the nail and the bullet triggers it.
Yeah, okay, it needs a sufficient amount of metal. It
3
used to
ounces,
be
not a lot.
Over 3 ounces. The nail would not be enough. So if you use a 3D printer to create a plastic gun, which is what you're basically doing here, before they had the sintered metal printers, if you made a plastic gun that way, you'd be in violation of the Undetectable Guns Act. Would you agree with that?
If it doesn't have the metal, yes.
Okay. Or if the nail is insufficient metal.
Or if you remove the metal. For example, you can print it with the metal, then when you go to an airport, take it out. Then you'd be in
But then
violation
it's
of the
not a
statute.
functional gun.
I
But
mean,
readily convertible, so
Yeah.
it would be a gun.
yeah, okay.
But the point is this, as long as you're making real guns, there's no violation at all. Right?
If you made a gun for yourself, we already established that, where it follows under that law, if you have a gun that doesn't detect, it's undetectable,
It's
right?
undetectable, then you're in violation.
Then you're in violation.
This is a carve out of BAFTI's regulation. Generally, BAFTI won't regulate it unless it runs into this statute. Is that a fair
Right,
reading?
right. I mean, we're not gonna, whether it's illegal or not, if you walk into a courthouse with a gun that is undetectable, and you go through the magnetometer and they pat you down, you pull the gun, and they pull this out,
You're in
you are
trouble.
going to have issues, right? I am going to get a call, and you're gonna be going, oh, okay, this is a big deal. You
Okay,
know,
I see. Any more
that's all
questions?
violation.
Anyone new? Anyone hasn't asked a question yet? All right, round two, go.
Josh, do you feel like the Undetectable Firearms Act is constitutional under the Second Amendment?
I think it's a small intrusion for one very simple reason. Virtually every gun needs metal to be functional, right? Even the 3D gun, you need a bullet and you need a firing pin, which is metal, and that.
If there were technology that would allow a material that was
Someone asked me this question this morning.
Yeah.
I mean, what happens if you make plastic bullets and a plastic gun entirely made out of plastic? I mean, a plastic bullet won't hurt very much. I can't imagine getting a high velocity.
They have it. They have it.
They
They have
hurt?
expendable cartridges that use non-brass casings, the powder is non-metal, and the projectile can be all kinds of hard materials that
Yeah,
aren't metal.
look, I wouldn't have a problem with the statute as it stands now that having a gun entirely made of plastic is illegal. The only reason why you would have that gun is to basically do damage, right? If you're having a gun with plastic bullets,
Purpose of the gun.
right, well, without being detected, right? That is a purpose. I think I'd be okay with that law. I don't see much good coming from that kind of a gun.
Some people would say that about any gun.
Yeah.
There's people
Well,
in
most
this room
guns
would say,
could-
what do you need a gun for except to do harm?
Well, but that's to be do harm in a place where you're not supposed to have one. And to the extent that Heller says in certain sensitive places you can have a gun, I think that's reasonable. I won't go quite that far. So you guys look crazy.
I'll play the provost card, which is take the last question.
Yes, sir.
Okay, moving forward, I mean, because it feels like the conversation about weapons is sort of this one narrow instance of a topic that's emerging now. The broader topic is intellectual property, when cost and use propagates, I can look forward 5 years and see, well, really, it's not inconceivable to say 5 or 10 years from now, people can readily make most anything in their garage. What does this topic morph into at that point?
I mean,
And I for law enforcement as well as John.
yeah, I mean, I can let the guys answer it, but I mean, if someone wants to create like an RPG in their backyard, right? Can they make an RPG? Sure. Could they buy one from some former Soviet republics that have for sale? Sure. My note of caution is, don't panic too much about this. Let the technology develop, let it flourish, see people innovate, and if it gets to the point that something really bad happens, perhaps we can revisit it. But I think this technology is so nascent that it would be very bad for productivity and creativity to stop it now with various sensors and filters. And that's my general gist. We should respect the technology, but don't move too quickly because the manufacturers want us to stifle this new innovation.
For, basically you come down to, he was saying printing a sneaker or whatever, intellectual property. You guys all here in school probably, you guys intend to give your software away for free, right? Okay, so there are laws and stuff like that to protect intellectual property, kind of thing, and so we enforce those laws. So here's the thing: if you do a replica of a Nike sneaker, right? Nike has trademarked the swoosh and everything like that. There are replicators all over the place, and Nike enforces that because it's civilly, right? So there's civil and criminal applications of that. So I think with this, preservation of intellectual property, the companies that are good at preserving their intellectual property, Microsoft, Google, Nike, things like that, they are going to be very well in this realm, and you're going to see them creating the legal cases, prosecuting things civilly, because it's their right, right? You can't walk around with a Nike symbol or sell a shoe that looks like a Nike and it not be a Nike, right? Because they're going to say product testing and everything like that. Other thing too is you can make your own car with 3D printing. I mean, there's metallic printers and stuff like that. But you have to register a car, you have to get a VIN, there's regulation. Why is that? Is it the government being overprotective? No, it's because things to be safe, right? We don't let four-wheelers, although there's one in my neighborhood that runs around, right? We don't let four-wheelers go around and be a street car, right? Because a four-wheeler goes up against an excursion, everybody in the four-wheeler is going to die, right? If they're in an accident. And we don't want that. So we say, hey, you can't be doing that. This is an off-road vehicle for off-road, but you're not supposed to be driving it down the interstate at 80 miles an hour.
Okay. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Just real quick, from the Federal Society, thank you all for coming. If anybody signed up for this and is interested in getting announcements about future events from the Federalist Society, let us know. Killing, if you could stand up and wave right down here, Killing can give you her email and she'll track you on our list. If there are folks on watching the live stream that want to join us, find the Phoenix Federalist Society on Facebook and we'll sign you up. We've got some really interesting events coming up. We'd love to have you join us. Thank you again to UAT for having us, and go forth and be technological.
Thank you all so much. Hey, thanks a lot. Great job. Thank you. I appreciate you.